The following is a story from my childhood that I very much want to forget. So, during the winter time, me and my friend were playing in a nearby wooded area. It didn't matter so much that we were playing over there because where our houses were, it was just on the edge of a forested place, so even if we did play in the forest, everybody knew it like the back of their hands. People would regularly go through there walking their dogs and whatnot, and there wasn't too far to go to get lost. It was a pretty dense forest to say the least, but there was no real worries because even if our parents had to go in looking for us, which never happened, they'd know it so well. Plus the authorities lived pretty close to us, so they could easily send out help if we needed to. So we still had our winter gear on anyway because it was pretty snowy outside, or at least was slushy. It didn't matter to us because where we lived here we were used to it and we had clothes that were more than suited for this. We were fine as long as we didn't climb anything or run. We did both of them. We were young, so we didn't really care at the time. Bertie and I usually just played amongst ourselves, and today was no different. We usually just played hide and seek, but today we decided to play tag, and we'd already been messing around pretending we were in the army with guns. And it was my turn to chase my friend. What we did was we given each other a big warning, so we had lots of time to be able to chase each other. That way it was more fun because where it was winter and there weren't that many leaves on the trees, it meant that you could really see for quite a long way. Where it was all slushy as well, you didn't really want to just lay down in it, so this was the best way to play we had figured out. So we went about doing this for a while, and I kept on getting Bertie, my friend, and eventually we decided we were going to make it even more fun. To try and make it harder for each other, we would just spin round for about 30 seconds with our eyes closed, so that way we were dizzy, and then we could go and search for each other and it would make it even more interesting. We would also carry sticks that we were pretending were guns from earlier, just because it made it more fun. At the time of this, it was still daylight and we had lots of time to get back, and even if we were in the deepest part of the forest, it would only take about 10 minutes to walk back anyway. So we were all good. So I started off by spinning round and waited for my friend to run off. I did so and had never been so dizzy or disorientated in my life, ironically. I went to run towards my friend and laughed and tripped over and hurt my knee. I couldn't get up for a few minutes. It wasn't a really bad pain, it was just a numbing pain. Most likely I couldn't feel it because it was so cold outside. I had no clue where my friend was and, to be honest, where I was going, because as I got up and started walking, my head was kinda shaking. I was calling out Bertie's name but I didn't get any reply. I began jogging round lightly but realised that I was practically going to have to crawl for at least another 5 minutes because how disorientated I was. This probably wasn't the best idea looking back on it, because this meant that I'd have no idea where I was going and I could very easily get lost in them woods. Even though I knew it pretty well, it was still going to be really hard to figure out where I was going if I lost track, because obviously it all looked the same. And where there weren't any specifically big trees to look for, or any shaded areas like you normally could where it was winter, it could make it very hard to navigate. But at the time I was so focused on this game, all I was doing was looking for Bertie, still holding my stick, searching for him. I searched for about 10 minutes and couldn't find anything. I decided that I was going to play the waiting game now, so I just sat by a tree that was bigger than the rest, where that if I positioned myself correctly behind it, then Bertie wouldn't know where I was and I could get a better sight of him. So I stopped calling out his name now and just waited. I was waiting for a while, but it started to get really cold and somewhat dark, but we were still a while away from the sunset. I knew I couldn't wait out much longer, but I decided just to sit there. It was eerily silent at first because I guess where we'd been playing for so long, I hadn't stopped to realise how that there was really no other people around. It was a bit unusual because sometimes you'd hear somebody walking their dog, but to have nobody, that was just weird. After a while of waiting though, I finally heard something. I heard some branches snap, and at first I thought it was just an animal, but I then realised that It was my friend. I instantly went silent, and I could see the breath as I exhaled where it was the winter months. As I waited, I could still hear them snapping, but it almost sounded too heavy to be my friend making them sounds. I waited and tried to see what I could find. There was nothing. I didn't understand why that I had no idea where my friend was, because normally he would have given his position away by now and I could start chasing him. So as I was standing there confused, I finally saw something out of my peripheral vision. I decided not to shout anything out because I wanted to sneak up on him this time. Now I can make it out now. Bertie was walking away from me, but he had his coat on differently this time. It was very faint, but I could make out where he was, so I decided that I was very quietly and slowly going to trail and follow him. I did so for a while, and I eventually got out of my original position and couldn't see where the tree was. I kept on very slowly and silently tracing him. I had to stop for a few times and just lay low because Bertie almost spotted me. I would stop and lay to the ground. Then the chase would continue. This kept on happening and I kept on getting closer and closer to where he was. It was getting more dark now and it's harder to make him out. I hadn't realised it, but I was now deep into the forest and wasn't exactly sure where I ended up. Once again, Bertie stopped and I did too, but this time it was different. He seemed to bend down and put something on the floor. I assumed it was his stick where he got tired from carrying it. But then he got up again and carried right on. It seemed weird, it almost seemed like he was walking and moving differently from before. I still dare say anything because I didn't want to give away my game. I began trailing him again, but every time that my footprints made a sound he would stop again. He seemed to not care, and every time he would just stop, do up his laces and keep on walking. For some reason, when we stopped again, I looked around and it hit me that I couldn't figure out where I was. I suddenly had this really weird feeling that I was in a dangerous situation that I immediately needed to get out of. I don't know why I felt this way, but something was just off, so I decided to stop and just let him go. I again don't know why I did this, but something just made me do it. So I was laying there, and instead of being the hunter, I began to feel like I was a hunted. It was more of a primitive feeling. My heart was going in my chest, my adrenaline was rising, and as I noticed that darkness was upon me, I got really scared. After a while I could no longer hear the footsteps, so I decided just to follow up that way just in case it was Bertie leading his way out. I was following the footprints in the snow. They were semi-covered because it had begun snowing again, but as I was following them, I saw something that seemed pretty off. After finally reaching where Bertie had stopped down to put what I thought was his stick, I saw some sweets on the floor. There were 3 of them. They'd obviously been placed there recently because there wasn't much snow over it and there was no stick in place. Even at the young age I was then, I knew it wasn't a good idea to pick them up. So I just looked at them confused, not really knowing what to make of the situation. It was getting very dark at this point, so I realised that I had to get out of there. I knew Bertie wasn't stupid and he probably either made his way back or I was just still following him. So I followed the footprints, hopefully leading me to safety. I kept on doing so, and I got to a point again where I thought Bertie had went to tie his shoelaces. As I looked down, there was even more sweets. They'd obviously been placed there by Bertie, but that didn't make sense. Neither of us had any sweets on us, and if he had some, he would have shared them before with me, so why would he have just left them there? I looked further up and I could see that just in the distance, this continued. I was a little confused and creeped out now, so I decided to stop following the footprints and I just walked off to the side. I couldn't see well over where the incline was, so I had to approach it. I was crouching down at this point, and I also swear that I could have heard more people ahead. As I was crawling up to the top of the hill, I heard another snap. Then I heard voices. Now, it wasn't just one. I was terrified by this. I felt my heart drop and I got this really weird feeling. As I stopped again, it was very cold and I really noticed it this time. I was too scared to look over the hill, so I crawled up to where there was a small opening that I could see by. Now, as I looked over, it kind of crevassed down into a small channel where there were very big hills on either side, and it kind of narrowed down until eventually there was the true forest. The forest that basically looked pitch black. It was so dense and you couldn't really see into. As I sat there, I could see that there was suites leading the entire way up. There was even more now, and there wasn't just one set of footprints. There was at least 3, and I could still hear the voices. Now, in my youth, I thought that this was either somebody playing tricks on me, or Bertie decided to mess around and get more of my friends. As I was leaning over, I accidentally broke a branch with my foot, and all of the voices that I could faintly hear stopped. I knew that something was off now, and something in my gut told me to run, and that's exactly what I did. I started running as quickly as I possibly could. I wasn't sure if there were people following me, but I was so caught up in the moment, I didn't even look back once, but I just knew that I needed to get out of there. No, I didn't know where I was going, but I was running like I'd never ran before. I ran for maybe 15 minutes until eventually I found that big tree and I knew my way back. I didn't bother calling out Bertie's name or anything, I just kept on sprinting. I was pretty fit when I was younger too, so jogging like this didn't concern or worry me. I kept on sprinting until eventually it was dark, but I was thankfully met with the opening where all the houses started again. I just quickly went inside and got moaned at by my mum for being out so late. My mum then told me that Bertie had been round half an hour ago wondering where I went. I was more scared to tell my mum that I hadn't found Bertie and I'd got lost, so I didn't bother saying a word, and I just acted like, oh, he was going to come out with me anyway, and that we hadn't played earlier. I kept that secret to only me and Bertie the entire time up until today. I didn't want to get in trouble with my parents, so I never told them or alerted the authorities or anyone. When I spoke to Bertie, he didn't quite know what to make of this either and told me that he thought I'd just messed around with him and went home to leave him out there in the forest, but we both never went in there to this day. At that age, neither of us were old enough to fully comprehend what could have possibly happened to me, but more than anyone, just myself. Looking back on it now, that was the most dangerous situation that I could have possibly ever been in, and I can't even think about the consequences of what might have just happened had I blindly continued on my own stupidity following that trail. I'm literally shaking thinking about it right now, and yes, this does still give me nightmares. I did file a police report since, but it was such a long time ago that they couldn't even do anything. But please, just let my story act as a warning to any of you. If you're young, please don't play outside on your own and do anything stupid. And if you're a parent, please take care to not let your child be as stupid as I was. Creepy Trio by Phoenix Vale. This happened last year, at the beginning of autumn. I'm a short Italian girl who's not intimidating at all, and I'm also pretty friendly. I was 18 years old and used to have long walks up the hills of my town. I usually wear gym clothes, headphones, and a small backpack. The walk followed up a simple course, up on one hill for a while, then back to the centre of the town, then back home. It was late afternoon and I was walking down the hill quite fast, getting closer to a small building about 200 metres away from the centre. The building was a small house used for parties or different events, but also used to be a calm place to stay in since it was far from the main road. Right next to the building was a lovely playground with a few benches on the corner. I've always seen a group of people sitting there chatting or playing cards. There are two different dirt roads you can choose from to go past the house. There is one on the right near the playground and one on the left behind the building over a little flyover between some trees. Since I didn't want to take the usual and most obvious right road, I decided to go left and take some pictures of the trees that were very colourful during this season. I was about halfway across and I felt the need to lower the volume of my headphones. Someone was trying to get my attention. Hey you. I turned around and noticed a group of guys that were walking towards me. One of them was waving at me and telling me to come closer to them. Curious and kind of worried at the same time, I stood still, holding the headphones in my hands. The guy approached me smiling. They seemed pretty nice at first. Hey sweetie, how's it going? Having a walk? We talked for a few minutes with just small talk and fake information from my side. After a bit, I tried to continue walking and said goodbye. I didn't want to keep the conversation going with them. One of them then shouted out, "Would you like to have a drink with us? There's a party inside, you should join us." I turned around again. The same guy, who was tall, fit, had dark short hair and dark eyes, got closer to me and smiles, and it was kind of weird the way that he did so, I thought. I mean, it just seemed quite fake and creepy. I gotta go now, it's getting late for me, I said. He kept following me, insisting for me to join them. I then realised the building was just empty and there was no music at all. The windows were open and there was no sound coming out there, so I then politely declined again, repeating to him my walk took me much time and I needed to get back home. "You're lost," he said, as he then looked at me disappointed and almost quite angry at me refusing his nice offer. He went back to the other two guys and I put my headphones on, not starting the music though, since I wanted to wait until they were gone or at least far enough that I was 100% comfortable to do so. As soon as they saw me put these on, they started talking again while I was walking away. Then I heard footsteps behind me. They had started following me. I didn't dare turn around, so I walked quicker to keep a distance. I panicked though, after 1 minute. The volume was completely turned down and I could hear every single word of what they were saying. The leader of the trio seemed to give the others orders to do some sort of things, and while I tried to focus on his words, the adrenaline was released inside my body, and as soon as I heard what he was saying, "Get her," I was terrified. The only thing I thought to do was run, so I sprinted as fast as I could, trying to reach the main road in time. Heavy footsteps then come right behind me, and I confirmed that I didn't hear their chat now. I reached the little wall next to the road and I climbed it to lose them. It worked. They stopped chasing me, and maybe they thought it wasn't worth it. I was then able to reach the main road, panting and shaking. I don't know why they wanted me to follow them. Now thinking about it, I was lucky and smart enough not to immediately turn the music volume up. They probably would have grabbed me and dragged me inside the house. I never warned the police about what had happened, and I think I should have done something. But as soon as I got home, I wanted to forget about it and go back to my normal life and just put it all behind me. Had to share this. It's been too long. By Hayat Kitty 1990. I'm a 26-year-old female living in Scotland. I have a disturbing and downright odd story that I've never considered sharing until now. It involves myself, my cousin and a few friends, and an absolute creep that vanished and got away with everything. My cousin and I were the same age and both 14 at the beginning of this 3-year ordeal. My cousin had gotten a new household computer and had installed it and used MSM, as that was the major instant messaging service back then. She started adding individuals from everywhere onto her contact list. One boy stuck out. He claimed his name was John Smith, age 15, from Blackpool, England. They started talking every day and exchanging innocent pictures and become very close friends. He quickly admitted he was older, 17, and apologised for lying. My cousin gave him the benefit of the doubt and they continued the friendship. Things only got weirder from this point on. He knew it was her birthday soon and wanted to send her a gift. She told me about this and we thought it would be cool and wanted to see what he was going to send, so she agreed, but waited a while before sending her address. He started by sending phone credit codes so they could text each other when the computer wasn't in use. She then gave him the address and he sent her a lot of stuff. I mean DVD players, huge teddy bears, DVDs, CDs, clothes, sweets and various other things that she had to try and explain to her parents as being things she had won from school competitions. This went on for some time, while he still maintained he was 17 and added that he made the money from playing in an under-21s football placement. Things only escalated when he wanted to come up and meet her. She told me that she was going to meet him and she was talking with her friend and that she was very safe and excited to do so. While making arrangements, he planned to take the train to Scotland, but of course the day before he was due to come up he admitted he is 21, had a car and a job. She was 15 and thought it was appealing and still went through with it. I phoned her that night and she didn't tell me much, just that she didn't want to talk to him again and didn't divulge any more information. A few days later, I received a contacts request from John on MSN. I accepted it and he told me about how that my cousin had stopped talking and he really wanted to know why. I didn't have the answers other than that she said that she just didn't want to talk to him again. Soon after, we become very good friends. He was starting to act the same with me, sending phone credits so I could text him. I found him really funny and nice. I told my cousin that we had been talking and she asked me not to speak to him again and didn't explain why. No explanation at all. That night, I told Mark what my cousin had asked me to do and he asked me if we could call to sort things out. I agreed later that night that he could call me and he did. The voice on the other end of the phone was odd. It was high-pitched and feminine sounding. We spoke and he explained that he had an accident that tore his vocal cords as a child. I felt bad for him and continued talking and thought maybe that was the reason that my cousin didn't want to speak to him anymore after being scared by this. I got a call from my cousin who told me that a large package had been sent to her house addressed to me. I went round to her house to get it. We both opened it. It was band t-shirts, CDs, new Converses, books, an iPod and money. I couldn't believe it. I wasn't sending it back though. At that age, getting all that stuff for free was incredible. I got home and called John to thank him for the gifts. He was happy that I was happy and we kept talking for a few hours. Lo and behold, he asked to come up and visit. I agreed and told my best friend and she was very wary and insisted on going with me. The day he was meeting with us, we had agreed on a location about 20 minutes away from where I lived. We waited outside of a shop for him to arrive, full of nerves and excitement. He was 10 minutes late, which magnified the feelings. Eventually though, however, what approached us at a very fast pace and come to an abrupt stop was a blue hatchback. He was sat there for 5 minutes before getting out. We stood and knew something was wrong immediately. What got out of the car was terrifying to two 15-year-olds expecting to see someone who was 21, handsome, tall and a warm person. This is what actually happened, nothing exaggerated. He stepped out of the car and stood about 5 foot tall. He was all in denim. His face, honest to God, looked like he was a burn victim. This man was in no way, shape or form 21. He was easily 50 or 60. Which we found out later, which was actually true. And he was truly intimidating. We smiled, said hello, and asked him to go on a walk. We walked towards my house. While walking to the destination, we whispered to each other and made a plan to run away from him. We explained that we were going to pop into a friend's house to get a DVD to watch at my house. We decided that we would go to my best friend's home, which was en route to my house. Both of us in tears, but hiding it when we went to our friend's house and near collapsed in the doorway. We gave a brief account of what had happened and told him that we needed to get away from him. We were petrified. He then told us to lock the door behind us and we went out into the garden. We then both climbed the fence and ran like we were being chased by all of hell. It was a really creepy feeling. We were running between the houses and back gardens to a heavily wooded area that we knew really well, which led to my house. We must have stayed there for hours. We knew roughly how long it would take him to get back to his car and maybe drive around to look for us, so we had to keep away from the roads, and we thought if we stayed put we'd be safe, which we were. During this time we had calls from John coming through but letting them ring out. We then made a dash to get to my house, where we called my cousin to ask her what was going on. She got her dad to bring her round and we talked it out. The now 4 of us stayed in my house all night and didn't leave each other alone, at least for a few days. We both got further texts and phone calls after this meetup but ignored them until he stopped. We were too young to tell anyone, so we decided to keep it a secret. Cut to about 6 months later, my friend and I were going back to Blackpool for a long weekend with her parents. About 2 days after I got into the trip, I got this text saying that he thought he saw me in Blackpool and confirmed this by describing my mint green summer top that I was wearing at the time and told me that he knew where we were staying. I told him to keep away or I'd phone the police. He apologised and agreed. The next day, I was approached by the lady that ran the bed and breakfast, and she told me that I had an envelope. He had written a note that basically said don't call the police and that he would never call me again, and included £500 for my friend and I. Stupidly, my friend and I just thought this was funny, not thinking, taking the money and already spending it in our heads, and never said a word. We didn't hear anything from him again until a year later. I received a picture message of a person lying with his wrist cut, blaming my cousin and I for ruining his life, because we didn't want to be in contact anymore and neither of us loved him. I contacted her and told her about the message. I then went round to her house and we both decided to tell her dad, and he immediately phoned the police. They asked us to monitor any contact and report it as evidence. Within hours of the picture, John had done something terrifying. He had called my cousin and her dad insisted he listen to the conversation. He told her that he had bought her a car and it was waiting outside her house, and he had left the area after dropping it off and gave her a specific description of what to do with it. The keys were still in the car. There was a blue bar on the steering wheel, and all of the documents were inside the back of the driver's seat. My uncle then phoned the police again, told them about the car, and that he then went outside to confirm John's description of the car. When the police arrived, they arranged for the car to be towed away and traced the numbers online and profiles that had been used for it. We never got any true information back from the police on all of this. It was horrible to know that he was watching us when we didn't even know about it, and that when we were at my cousin's house he still knew and we didn't know. He could have been anywhere at any time, knew anything about us, and had the capability to go to extreme limits and do many lies and take unthinkable actions against us. We get chills every time we think about it and what had happened. It just terrifies me, and I've got a horrible realisation of what we had done and what could have potentially happened. Let this just be a warning to any young people online to never go and meet any strangers, and always take extreme precaution and always look after yourselves. I saved my mum from robbery, or potentially something far more sinister, by JDJN13. This is a story from when I was 18. I'm 25 now. My mum and I were regular attendees at our local church. We both attended different midweek groups, however, as I met with some of the younger and my mum went to one with some of the older middle-aged people. Anyway, my mum's group was about half a mile from our house, and we didn't own a car, so she would often walk there on her own. We didn't own a car as well because it was a single mum in my family, so it was about a 7:30 start. This was fine in the summer because it wasn't dark until around 9ish. When her group ended at around 10, she would call me and I would start walking or running to meet her to walk home with her. We would usually meet not too far away from her group, but we would always stay on the phone until we met up. One night in question, it was all usual. She called. I got my trainers on, locked the house and began jogging to meet her. I usually ran because it was good training for my rugby, and despite being a big guy, I'm 6'2" and 19 stone. I would always run because I have an overactive imagination and get creeped out by darkness and shadows. In order to meet my mum, I had to cross our local park and go through a dark patch of trees behind some of our local houses. It was usually just before the trees that we met. Anyway, I'm running and my mum's walking. We're talking about her evening and who was there when she suddenly says, "Joe, hurry up, I think someone's following me." My heart goes through the roof as I start to panic, so I start sprinting with the rest of the road ahead of me until I meet her. I tell her to stay calm and keep me updated on her position. My mum is a tough person though. She's strong and very short. I hear my mum screaming through the phone and I also hear it in the distance. "Get away from me. What do you want? I don't have any money. You can hear that I have my phone. Take it if you want." I had only ever heard my mum swear once before, so I really knew that she is in a panic. This really scared me. I ran like I'd never ran before. It usually takes me a good 45 or 60 seconds to run it, but I was so much faster this time. It's amazing how your body has this whole other level of physical exertion when the adrenaline kicks in. By now I can see them in the distance. My mum's screams were piercing to me. I can see the guy has her by the hair and is dragging her about. She was fighting him all the way. I get there and shouted to get the F off my mum and charged in. He was tall and lean but hardly any weight to him, maybe 180 pounds max. What happened next was basically a blur, and only through me and my mum talking about it have we come to some conclusion on what really went on. So he saw this hulk of a man charging at him, and he immediately let go of my mum, and she fell to the ground sobbing and tried to run. I caught him fairly easily and took him off guard and put him to the ground hard. My mum says I took him clean off the ground before smashing his head/shoulders into the ground. He grunted and we rolled, but I beat him up. In rugby, when someone tackles you, you have to be quick on your feet so you can challenge for the ball and try to win the ball back for your team. It's at this point that I blank out, but apparently I hopped over this guy, headbutted him and repeatedly beat his face. Someone from the houses behind heard the screams and called the police. One of the guys that was in the street turned out to be a policeman, and he come over to investigate. I remembered him dragging me off this guy, and it was then that I saw the blood and scratch marks on my arms. He had called me, but I hadn't even noticed it. The police arrived quickly and we had to be interviewed by them, which is still a bit blurry. Apparently the off-duty copper had thought I was the attacker, since all he saw was me beating him. The guy was on their records as a thief. He had mugged a girl in a town not that long before. When police interviewed him, he claimed that he was just robbing her, but I'm not so sure. He's in prison now. I've never been so scared in my life. I'd always imagined situations like this where I was a hero saving people, but I've always wondered if I'd be able to react the same when the moment come. Thankfully, I haven't had to learn since. It just makes me so glad that I was being good to my mum and able to save her. You never think bad stuff will happen to the ones you love until it actually does. I Saw the House Intruder by Xeonology. This was about a year ago, when me, my little brother and mum lived in an apartment complex out in Howell, Michigan. I was 18 at the time, I'm 19 now. So here's some backstory. Both of my parents were divorced and I'd stay at periodic times with both of them. My mum had moved several times from Jackson to Flint to Detroit and finally Howell. She has her own place now in a different part of the city, which is great though. Well, how is a small town between Brighton and Lashing? Anyway, to the story. It seemed like a normal day. I walked for about half an hour to the small gas station to get a couple of monsters. While I was there, some guy was behind me, but he was a little too close for my comfort. I'm not worried by this, but I'm introverted and don't like people too close to me unless I know them well or think they're cute. I bought the monster and thanked the lady behind the glass and turned on my way. I'm usually able to tell someone's emotions or get a feeling if they're trustworthy or not most of the time, since I've always been able to naturally notice that. As I look over, this guy was somewhat skinny and pudgy with some pretty lifeless eyes. Now, I wouldn't say anything about that. I figured he could have been bipolar or depressed. I didn't think too much of it and began to walk home. Now, I have to walk across a busy intersection just to take the path across a wooden bridge and park just to get to the apartment complex. Now, I felt like someone was staring at me. It was the dead of summer and the day was muggy. I kind of turned round to look and saw the guy who stood so close behind me earlier, and it looks like he's about 20 feet away from me or something. I didn't hear what he said, but it sounded like, "You're just like me." I didn't know what he meant, so I kind of laughed it off. "What? I didn't hear you." He didn't really say anything after and just kind of walked off. I figured finally he left me alone, I can go home and order some Chinese. Anyway, I got home and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. It was about 10 PM and night rolls around. I'm sitting in bed Skyping with my friend who is in New York. We were talking about some annoying people on a web browser game that we played. That's when I heard what sounded like faint scratching sounds. I ignored it at first. It was just the neighbours, I thought to myself. But then I heard a large slap against the glass. I thought, what's this? And I become very uneasy. I decided to pull back the curtains and there was the same weird dude from before, standing there just staring at me. This was really creepy. I now shared a bedroom with my little brother, who was just going into kindergarten, and I slept on a pull-out bed while he slept on his own bunk. I immediately felt my heart drop for a moment and wasn't sure what was about to happen next. Everything seemed so surreal. I told my little brother to go get up and go into my mum's room and tell her to call the police because there was a man outside. I immediately ran out of the room after basically pushing him out as quickly as possible and went to the side closet where I keep my stuff. Now, my dad didn't like me living in big cities alone with my mum, so he'd let me borrow a gun to protect myself while I was younger. It was a long rifle, 30 or 6. I always kept it unloaded on safety. Well, I loaded that thing up and took it off. Then I went to the patio, but the light went off. This dude was now trying to break in and force the door open. I immediately pulled up the rifle and yelled at him that if he tried coming through the door, I'd murder him. Obviously not the best choice of words since we lived on the bottom floor and we had neighbours above us. Not only that, but it could have been bad if I'd shot him before he passed the door and went outside. He kind of then just froze up and then got a hold of himself and bolted. My mum come back after having called the cops and was terrified to death since she originally thought my little brother just had a nightmare but saw me with the gun. The cops eventually came and then left. There wasn't really any evidence and the description I gave never went anywhere, but God, this is probably the most scary thing that ever happened in my life. The thing that really scares me more than anything is what would have happened if I wasn't there and my mum was asleep and he went straight to my little brother's bedroom. I think I just stopped something sinister from happening by Lefty 2 Guns. This happened the first night in my new house. My parents had just split up and my father and I had just moved into a new home. I was 16 years old at the time in Mao. Now, I've always been a night owl. Our first night there, I was in my own room watching a movie. The houses on this street were pretty close together. I would say about 10 feet apart with a chain link fence in the middle. My bedroom window was directly across from my neighbour's side door. This was about 4 AM if I remember correctly. I had just smoked a bowl of my good chronic when I heard this car with a tuner sounding muffler pull outside in front of possibly my neighbour's driveway. I thought this was odd because I had already met with them and it was a preacher. His wife had a newborn baby, so I knew my neighbour's car shouldn't have sounded anything like that. I hear the chain link fence make some noise, so being the overly cautious paranoid person that I am, I peek out the window to see a fairly tall guy dressed in all black, with his hands cupped over, peeking into the door. I instantly get goosebumps and bad vibes, but I start to blame the weed for making me paranoid, and I just tell myself that nothing's wrong with this. That it was maybe their brother or possibly a friend of theirs, so I just head back to bed. I'm about to unpause the movie, but I get this feeling that I should take another look. So then, just as I take a look out the window for the second time, the guy is still standing there. He then proceeds at that moment to reach up to their bulb and unscrew it on their porch. In a split second, it goes from lit to completely dark. I'm thinking, hell, what do I do? Should I call 911, wake up my dad? Or do nothing? Now at that moment, I look down and see my orange hunting mask. It has the eyes and mouths cut out. I put it on. I figured that it would be more scary to this guy than just a normal 16-year-old kid. I didn't want him to see me and blame me for this botched murder, rape or robbery or kidnapping, and I was also stoned, so it seemed to be a pretty good idea. So I put my mask on, peek my head behind the shades and had my face by the glass. I knock really hard 4 times and this guy turns and I wave as creepy as possible. I couldn't see his face, but he was probably terrified because he started running as fast as possible and peeled out. My dad went over in the morning after I told him and informed him what had happened. They found out that where the light bulb was untwisted, there was this huge knife on the ground.
This is a story about the most disturbing thing that ever happened to me while delivering pizzas in high school. There are a few others, but this one stands out above the rest. I was 16 years old and just got my license, so I needed a job to pay for a car. A few of my good friends were working at a local pizza place in town, close to my house, so I decided to apply and got the job without even having to interview, because they were so short-staffed. They also hired me as a delivery driver, without ever checking to see if I had a driver's license or not. I did, but I always thought this was quite funny. A month or 2 later, we were having a really busy night, and I was sent off to a delivery in a fairly nice part of town to the next city over. This was before GPS was common, and not very reliable, so we still used maps to locate houses. This particular house was in a new development, so it wasn't listed in any of our directions, but my boss thought he knew where it was and gave me directions. He was way off, so I had to call the house for directions, and this is where things got weird. The conversation on the phone was normal. I told the man I was near his house, but needed directions because the ones I was given weren't accurate. He was very understanding and told me how to get there from the road I was on. A few minutes later, I pull into his driveway and instantly get a bad feeling. He was a man in his early 50s or 60s, and was standing in the middle of his driveway with a creepy, satisfied smile on his face, and wearing a maroon silk bathrobe. I got out my car and gave him his 10 each Hawaiian pizza, which costed $10.95 at the time. He gave me a $20 bill and told me to keep the change. Considering I was late on the delivery and had to call the customer for directions, I wasn't expecting anything for a tip, let alone almost $10. I drove away from the delivery, thinking that something was off, but I got a great tip, so I was happy. I lit up a smoke and turned on my radio when I felt my phone vibrate. It was the number from the house I was just at. I got nervous, thinking it was going to be a complaint or something, because why else would someone call the delivery guy after he has just delivered your food? My blood curled at the words that came out of his mouth.
"Do you want to come back over to get the knife?"
he said. Or at least that's what I heard. I said nothing and hung up the phone and drove back to work as fast as I could. I called one of my friends who was working there at the time, and I told him what happened. On the 5-minute ride back to work, he called me at least 3 or 4 times. For some reason, I actually answered one of the calls he gave me, and he asked me if I wanted to come back after I get off work and spend the night. I was greeted at work by laughter from pretty much everyone working that night. Everyone thought I was either faking or overreacting. Then I got another call on my phone from the same guy. I showed my manager while the phone was ringing and he let it go to voicemail. That's when he decided to call the restaurant. Once this happened, my manager realised this was probably a serious situation and answered the phone pretending to be me. He had a very short conversation with the guy and at the end told him he's not allowed to do business with us anymore and we are blocking his number. When my boss hung up the phone, his face was pure white and looked like he could barely comprehend what had just happened. I asked what the guy had said, but my boss would not repeat the words that came out his mouth. I was so paranoid that I had to stay with my friend that night instead of going home. Guess who called me a couple of hours later? Yeah, he called again, at least 10 times. For at least a week or 2, I was living in fear of being kidnapped. I was always looking at the people or cars that were around me and being paranoid that I was being watched or followed. It's possible that I was right because I started to get phone calls again. This is when I decided to call the cops and put this all to an end. I explained everything to the officer and he assured me that he would take care of the situation. Turns out the cops did nothing. I live in a low crime town of less than 20,000 people. This guy didn't have anything else to do that day, except write some speeding tickets during the afternoon, then some DWIs in the evening. The calls kept coming and my paranoia grew. This needed to stop, so I told my boss that things hadn't improved and he called the cops himself. An officer came down to the restaurant and took down our statements. Unlike the other officer, this man seemed visibly shaken and angered by the events that had happened. He promised me that he would personally handle the situation and that I didn't have to worry anymore. This police officer followed up on what he said, and I never heard from that creep again. I kept that same job for about 3 years after this, and had nothing but great times there.
Thank you for watching the video. I wanted to say a massive thank you and shout out to my real life brother, ThatCreepyPastaGuy, who you can hear features on this video. Make sure you go and subscribe to him and check out his content because his voice is similar to mine and he makes very good videos. So I wanted to say a thank you again to him. If you enjoyed the video then please give it a like and subscribe for updates on my future content. If you have any suggestions then please leave them in the comments for me below. And yeah, I wanted to say thank you again to everyone for watching. I'm going to be able to upload more and do more collabs like I said yesterday where I'm feeling a lot better now. Thank you for all the messages of support and as always thanks for watching. Have a nice day everyone.